This video is going to cover how the knee works in Double Dragon 2. And before I get into it, I wanted to cover a little bit about how Double Dragon 2 handles lag and input during lag. So the game, as you can see, actually lags quite a lot. In fact, it lags pretty much every other frame. Now, one thing that Double Dragon 2 does is that it drops all controller input during lag. So if I try to punch on a lag frame, it will completely ignore the input. But if I punch on a non-lag frame, it will get picked up. Ordinarily, this isn't an issue because most people, when they press a button, will hold it down for more than one frame, but some people do press fast, and it can be a problem. So, about the knee, the flying knee can be performed after you jump, and you're in this crouching animation. You're also in this animation after getting knocked down and getting up. And if you look at the top left here, I've got at address 55. There's a counter here that counts up when you're in this crouching animation. If you push A and B and then left to right, when the counter checks at 6 or 7, you'll perform the knee. So I'm going to press A and B and right on 6, and he'll do the knee. Now the counter only checks twice. It checks when it ticks up to 6 and when it ticks up to 7. So there's one scenario to be aware of, and that's that, so I'm here. If you happen to be pressing A and B and right on a lag frame, it will not perform the knee. So when you're trying to do the knee, what you want to do is, of course, make sure you get it within the right window, but also when you press A and B and left to right, make sure to hold it down. So I'm going to press it, the button, I'm going to press it on the lag frame this time, but this time I'm going to hold it down, and so we'll take effect on the next frame here, and so we'll still perform the knee. Sometimes you might accidentally just tap it, and even if you're in the right window, if you happen to be triggering it during the lag frame, then that means it can eat your input and it won't do the knee, even though you pressed it at the quote-unquote correct timing. So they sometimes say that the knee has a 4-frame window, and it's not entirely accurate since the game only checks twice for the inputs necessary for the knee. So that actually means you have a really, really limited control over when the knee actually comes out. You can only do it 1 of 2 possible times. So the other thing that I wanted to mention, and I guess the $1,000,000 question is, like, why do people duck the knee sometimes? So if you look on the top left here, there's a global timer that actually also controls when enemies duck on the knee. So you'll be noticing that sometimes when you're getting up and doing the knee, that they'll duck. So this time around, I'm going to do the knee on 6, and they'll hit. But if I load the same state, and if I do the knee on 7 this time, he'll duck. So the ducking is actually controlled by a couple things. The game actually has a few checks. The first check is it actually checks to see if you're in the air. Enemies obviously are not going to duck unless you're in the air. It's not necessarily just the knee, but any jumping at all, they may duck. And the next thing is that the enemy has to be in a situation in which they are engaged in combat with you. So if they're doing some plane shifting or cartwheeling, they won't duck at all. So you can sometimes catch an enemy during some of these animations to do the knee, and you won't have to worry about the ducking mechanic. But the mechanic comes into play if they are quote-unquote engaged with you and you're in the air. So a little bit more, to illustrate a little bit better about how this mechanic works, I am actually going to cheat, and I'm going to fly. So right now, I have messed with the game's RAM values a little bit, don't worry about it. But I'm going to be in the air, and so the address here, the global timer, I'm going to be manipulating using cheats. So what we're going to do is we're going to freeze it at value 1. So we load the state, I'm going to stay in the air. So I'm going to reload the state. So I'm going to freeze it Forgot to toggle the cheat. I'm going to freeze it at value 1. Load the state. Notice he never ducks. I'm going to update it to value 2. He does not duck. I'm going to update it to value 3. Does not duck. Value 4, he will duck. So the global timer ordinarily is always in motion. It just counts up. It can only count on non-lag frames, but it's basically just always counting. And that's actually what determines when the knee comes out. I used another cheat so this guy can't move left or right for our research purposes. So the setup is that for 3 consecutive counts, he's going to not duck, and then, or Linda, any enemy, it's basically the same. So for 3 counts, they will not duck, and then for the 4th count of the global timer, they will duck. So here's where this gets interesting. The question is, okay, well, can you try to manipulate when the knee comes out to use this to your advantage? Not really, as it turns out. So I'm going to load another state here, and we're going to turn off the cheats. And so in this particular state, here's a couple interesting things. So if what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump on the frame 188. And then I'm going to knee when the counter ticks to 6. And then it hit. I'm going to do the same thing. Jump on frame 198 when the counter ticks to 7. And notice that he ducks. Now same thing this time, except instead of 188, I'll do 190. And then I'm going to knee at 6. So 190 at 6 is the same as 188 at kneeing at 7, if that makes sense. So the question is, well, is it to your advantage to knee early or late, since there's only 2 times to do it? And the answer is, well, actually it depends on where the global timer is. So similarly, if I went at 190 from this particular state here, I happen to know in advance that if I kneed at 190, it would fail. But if I knee at 7, 190 at 6 will fail, and if I start at 190 and then knee at 7, it will succeed. It's a little convoluted, but so the answer to whether kneeing early or late is necessarily better actually depends on where the global timer is. Now, you can know where the global timer is, sort of, by using an audio cue at the beginning, but the problem is that lag messes up the timer, and also the timer isn't cleared from stage to stage. So the timer you had at the end of stage 1 carries over to the beginning of stage 2, so for practical purposes then, it doesn't look like it's going to be feasible yet unless someone finds some other setups to be able to manipulate when enemies duck the knee in real time, unfortunately. So as far as like the possible times that you can start a knee, so there's going to be, if you start the knee, there's going to be 3 inputs where the knee succeeds, and then the fourth one will fail, and then however you want to stagger those out between kneeing early and kneeing late, so to speak. So there's only really 2 opportunities to knee because the game only checks twice. So you could say like there's an early and there's a late one, but one is not necessarily better than the other, it just depends on where the global timer is. And starting the knee at a given point, you have a 3/4 chance success rate, depending on where the global timer is. So that's what I got. Let me know if you have any questions.